For those of you who are new to the second half of the session, my name is Roger Zender. I'm an associate university librarian here at Kelvin Smith Library. And so we're really excited for this portion of the day to switch over to our insights from our CWRU partners. So we have some great talks planned for you from our UCITE Center, which you can see here is a University Center for Innovation, Teaching, and Education. We also have CWRU's writing program here is also to speak. And then we also have a couple departments from UTech, the Teaching and Learning, as well as the Research Computing Department. So I'm going to ask each of them just to introduce themselves right before they speak. And they'll also be able to speak right from their tables here. And then we'll save the questions for afterwards. Although my understanding is with Matthews, there's going to be a little bit of interactivity for his presentation. So I would just ask you to just hold up if you want to speak, and we'll bring a microphone around to you so we can make sure that our remote audiences can hear. So with that, I will turn it over to Matthew, and you can take it away.
Thank you, Roger. My name is Matt. Faculty member in the Department of Music, where I work in music education. I taught for 12 years public schools before coming to CASE, and now I'm here working with all of you wonderful colleagues, so it's great to be here today. I thought that we may start off the afternoon with a discussion about GenAI and why would we use it? Do we use it yes? Do we use it maybe? Do we use it no in our classes? And this really came out of some of the conversations that we've been having here at the university, in particular one in the spring of last semester, where a faculty member said, well, I'm feeling a little pressured to use GenAI, but I'm not sure how I would go about it. And that kind of rung a bell for me wearing my Center for Teaching and Learning hat to think, well, maybe you don't need to use it. So I wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time thinking about not rushing in because it's the shiny new birthday toy that everybody wants and sees, and you've got to rush to the store to get it before it sells out, but really just kind of taking a pause to consider how the use of the tool or the use of a GenAI tool, because there's many, may align with your learning objectives and your learning goals for your class, and that should be what's kind of helping you out with the answer of yes, no, and maybe. The QR code that's on the first slide is a link to a digital version of the handout. So if you're joining us online, you can access that. And if you can't, then you can email us at ucite@case.edu and say, that's not right, Matthew, and we'll get that to you. But the QR code should link to a digital handout, and those of you who are here with us in person have a copy of that. I thought that for the time that we have today that we'll just kind of think about maybe two goals or objectives. One is to kind of consider a decision-making pathway for the use of GenAI tools in your learning spaces, whether those be traditional classroom spaces, lab spaces, or some kind of performative space or a clinical setting, depending upon your discipline. And then second, to maybe think about and identify some clear, emphasis on clear, syllabus language to communicate your GenAI guidelines if you are going to allow students to engage with the technology so that they understand where you're coming from and you have an opportunity to make maybe things that have gone on in your head in terms of conversation very explicit with the students so that they have a sense of not only the what, but the why, the reason behind that. I'm going to be sharing kind of a flow chart with you today that is a great resource that I collegially borrowed from a teaching and learning center at Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, so just down the road from us here. But I really liked the kind of, if you responded to this, kind of walking through it. So we're going to spend a little bit of time with this first, thinking about this pathway. So the big question then is it possible for my students to work on my assignments using GenAI tools? Right? And there's a binary response to that, probably yes or no. If it's no, conversation over until you figure out how you're going to set up your policies to convey that. If it's yes, I think the next step at the bottom of the screen is really vital, vitally important. Is that okay with me as a faculty member? If it's not, if that feels in a crunchy area, then it probably means that there needs to be a little bit more self-reflection on why I would use it, why I would want my students to use it, why I'm not okay with them using that. And on the handout at the very bottom of the first page, there's a couple of points that I would just highlight here related to equitable use. and these are ethical things to kind of consider. So thinking about the fact that some Gen AI tools may have benefits for subsets of your students, and this kind of ties in with the idea of universal design for learning, multiple ways of representing knowledge, multiple ways for students to engage with knowledge, and multiple ways for them to demonstrate their ability with knowledge and skills. So if they're using Gen AI tools, or it would help them and they have a learning disability, or English is not their primary language and they're using some kind of Gen AI tool to help process and translate, then maybe that's a conversation to think about. And maybe that's not something that we've thought about. We've been thinking about it from the angle of our content or our discipline, but not how maybe some students may need to access some of that information to benefit themselves. And then the other point that I would just highlight is the fourth bullet there. Before requiring Gen AI tools, think about the fact that some of those tools are gradually moving to a cost-based platform away from freeware or shareware. And if there's going to be a cost associated with it, what kind of financial burden does that bring into play for students who may already be struggling to be here at Case Western Reserve University? There are plenty of haves, have-nots, and in between, and we often forget that because of our setting. So those are some things to kind of think about. If it is okay with you, then there's 4 categories that this particular resource suggests. One would be no, obviously, again, it's not appropriate. And so they categorize this as the class would be closed to Gen AI tools. Another one, maybe and yes, restricted conditional. I think that's the model that's being shared here. Those kind of are similar to me. The maybe part. Restricted and conditional I think of as 2 very related terms. I'm always looking for positive ways to convey information to students, so I would lean towards conditional rather than restricted or restrictive, because I would want them to have the particular guidelines where they might be using it. And then finally, yes, students can use it. I want to encourage you to use it. I want you to be creative with your use of Gen AI tools. I want you to teach me what you're learning through the use of Gen AI tools. So those are kind of the larger models from this particular resource. Let's talk a little bit in more detail about some of the specifics. If you decide that your class is closed, meaning no, we're not going to use Gen AI in here at all, then something to consider is that assignments may need to be adjusted to reflect that no, and your assessments may also need to be adjusted to reinforce that no. And I know that my colleague Martha Schaffer sitting next to me is really focused on some of those assessment ideas, so that's something to kind of think about. On the second page of the handout, I would draw your attention down towards the bottom. This idea of towards Gen AI resistant assignments. Again, all of these talking points are coming from the Gettysburg resource. But this idea that you're looking at process over product with your assignments, and how will you convey that? How will you revise writing assignments, as one example, to move maybe away from a product emphasis to a process emphasis? Because a product can be generated by ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot fairly readily at this point. And detection software, that's another conversation. Don't do it. That's the answer to that conversation. But that's something to think about as well. How do I do that? If one of my assignments has been that midterm paper or the final paper, and I want to consider that now in the age of Gen AI tools, how do I renew that? How do I revise that to emphasize the process and not just the product, which could be reproduced by someone if they were short on time just going on ChatGPT? So there's some bullet points there to kind of think about that. Think about short assignments. Think about a combination of in-class and out-of-class assignments. And again, writing specific things. Martha is among the gurus, so I'm not going to spend a lot more time on that. But again, the third bullet point on the slide, I would reemphasize, avoid using those detectors. Time and time again, it's been shown that they're just not effective. And for kicks and giggles, I'll run my introduction class that I'm teaching this fall. I'll run student assignments in through some of those detectors that are available, knowing that these students are super honest. You just have to take my word for it. And it still flags them as plagiarism. And some of the flags are because they're bringing quotes in from articles that they're supposed to be bringing in, and they're citing it, but it still gets flagged. So there are some things in the detection software that really don't always work the way that we think that they might. And in some cases, those tools are quite biased. Another conversation. So restricted is another thing that the Gettysburg model talks about. These are maybe for specific tasks. So maybe there's some GenAI tools that can be used to save time, that can help people with learning activities, that can be integrating GenAI into processes, like generating some ideas or submitting paper in a semi-protected environment like Microsoft Copilot, not ChatGPT that goes out to the world, and then having ChatGPT review that if one of the objectives for the class might be moving into a more academic language style of writing. So restricted is one way to think about it. My preference, my bias would be more along the lines of conditional, that students can use it for these specific kinds of reasons, or if you are going to use it, as an example with my class, I expect you to cite that you've used GenAI tools, which tool you used, what prompt you gave it, and a sentence or two about what you got out of it and how you've adapted that within your assignment. So again, it gives me a sense of how the students are interacting with the tool, and we can have conversations about that emergently as the class goes along. And finally, this idea that, yeah, open, go for it. Use it as you would like, because my learning objectives for my class really encourage that kind of thing. It still requires us, I think, to discuss the specific professional context in which it might be used so that students start to understand outside of the classroom environment where this might show up in a vocational setting, that's incredibly important. And also making sure that even if it's an open use policy, still referring back to the Case Western Reserve University academic integrity policy and how things do align and don't align with your open use is important. We certainly don't want to kind of catch our students off guard and, hey, just surprise, that's an academic integrity policy violation. So even if it's open, there should be some kind of guidance there for students and explanation as to why or how you've reached that particular decision. So let's think about for a moment that you said maybe or yes, that yes, it's okay, or conditionally these are things that you can do. You still need to kind of think about, again, the language that you're going to put in your syllabus or associate with the assignments. So again, students understand the what they are supposed to be doing, and again, having a verbal conversation with them to reemphasize why or how you came to that particular decision. The comment that you see here is maybe the start of that. One idea that you could submit materials that contain that content or is based or derived from it as long as it's properly documented. I would be biased and say go further and say how you're going to document it. Again, and this is a revision that I had to make for my intro to research class that I'm teaching this fall, and it's gradually gotten a little bit more specific and more specific and more specific over the past couple of semesters to the point to where I'm pretty comfortable with it now, and I'll have a conversation with my students. Do you understand that? Do you have any questions about that? And if you do, shoot me an email, I'll get back to you, and maybe I'll have to revise it again. So the syllabus is a living document for most of us. We shouldn't feel like, well, we have the statement in there and that's it. As things come up and change throughout the semester, just put a new date on the updated syllabus, put it into the learning management system, make sure everybody's aware that that's a revision, and go on. That allows for that kind of flexibility. So I want us to think for just a second about this idea that you did say yes or maybe. And we're going to take just a few minutes and we're going to have an advanced class session because you're all advanced colleagues, and we're going to do it lickety-split, meaning very fast. I want you to think about the situations for your class. Maybe you've already set up a policy in your syllabus statement that says yes, you can for these reasons, or you've set up a policy statement that says no, you can't for these reasons. And I want you to just talk with someone close by. So we're not going to get up and move around because we have time constraints, but just talk to somebody next to you or near you about what you've already done with your syllabus in terms of those statements, or what you might do if you were the instructor. And to help you out, if you want to, this is not cheating. If you look on the third page of the handout, there are 4 descriptions there at the top for kind of statements and guidelines about protecting ways that students are thinking about things. Be careful of not having students develop reliance on GenAI as a crutch, and then if you take it away for something like a final exam or a final project and they're not able to do the things cognitively that you wanted to, it had become a crutch for them. So that's something to kind of think about in terms of how that's going to be impactful in your syllabus statements as well. And number 4, I would draw your attention to explaining academic misconduct. What does that look like for your class? What are the consequences for that? And how will you maybe approach that? So we're going to take 2 minutes for you just to talk to people around you about maybe something that you've already put in, or based on some of these suggestions here, and there are some additional ones in the syllabus as well from the University of Michigan Center for Learning and Research and Teaching and Learning. And just think about what might be appropriate for your discipline, because context matters in this case. Ready, set, go. All right, ding, that's the classroom bell. We're coming back to the full group. So you had a few minutes to think about syllabi statements that you may already have in place, or if you were teaching a class and you were thinking about a specific learning objective, if you have yes, no, or maybe, a statement that you might have in your syllabus, or a broad statement that you might begin with. And so we have some microphones for the folks who are here in person. Yes, you're going to speak. It's okay. It's all going to be fine. We're all friends here. We'd like to have some people share about what their thoughts are, particularly maybe somebody who already has a statement. Could we start with someone who already has something in their syllabus, or they've thought about it and they put something in writing? Oh, surely somebody has. Look at that, Aaron Smith in the back row. So brave. Thank you very much.
I can't stand silence, apparently. I don't know. But yeah, I had a statement that was very similar to yours, or the method that you like to use. Yes, you can use it, but I want you to document the process to me. Tell me what prompt you used. What was the experience like? How did that compare to your own writing? None of the students took me up on it.
Fascinating.
So I thought that was interesting. Or either that they didn't want to use it, which I've had students tell me, I don't trust the results, and I've tried things and haven't found a good correlation. Or they did and didn't want to reveal and feel called out for that for some reason. So I need to do some tweaking and really emphasize it is okay to tell me about this.
Yeah, and I love the idea that it's a conversational approach to it. Tell us a little bit about the nature of the class. Is it a writing intensive class?
Yeah, it's one of the communication intensive classes. So yes, writing and some reading involved. So yeah.
Okay, great. Good ideas. And again, flexibility in there. Somebody who is thinking about, or maybe not have a policy, but you're about ready to implement one. Look at that, Garrett in the back as well.
Like literally, I'm writing a syllabus right now, and I've got the heading, and I didn't know quite how I was going to do it, but the middle approach, the sample 2, was exactly what I was thinking, but couldn't put to words yet. And I was so excited to see this idea of I want using it for brainstorming, but I don't want using it for output, because that's really where I like to see my tools are in the middle, not at the end. But yeah, no, this was a great way of, I like the way this is laid out.
And again, I think that, the sample material from Gettysburg had those 4 categories, but the materials that I'm sharing with you from Michigan has 3, open, conditional, and closed. And so the 2 in the middle could be collapsed if you want, or you can choose the language that you prefer. I think that conditional is, again, a more open-ended than restrictive. Restrictive for an undergraduate might be, oh yeah? Let me show you. Anybody have a no? That we have one in the back over here.
With the caveat that I might change my mind.
Great, flexibility.
I was teaching freshman composition, and it was mostly to students for whom that would be their only English class, and some of whom it would be their only humanities class. So I said, I know how this works. I know you have access to it. I can't control you, but there's a person standing in front of you who has a PhD in this discipline, and I want to teach you how to be a better writer. This is a really rare opportunity. This may not ever happen again in your entire life. Take advantage of it. Let me teach you how to do long math, and then if you use a calculator later, that's fine. But let me show you how to do this. Take advantage of this single moment, and if you trick me and you don't, that's your choice. But I'm asking you to engage in this kind of process and trust me. And if after this you never do it again, so be it. So I might change my mind, but most of them at least heard where I was coming from and had the grace to lie to me if they were doing something else.
But I think that again, the conversational nature of that is super important. We can go back to the slide where I said it's vitally important for it to be okay with you as the faculty member. That's step one. But then the conversation about how you arrived at that, explaining to students the how and the why of the decision, really will help to develop that relationship between the person, the teacher, and the person, the student. And that person-to-person relationship will strengthen their learning because the students will feel like they've been heard, and you have a chance to explain why you're doing that. And coming out of the pandemic, we're starting to see some educational research that says students really need that more than they have maybe before, or before whatever normal was before the pandemic, because they have been learning in a vacuum without that kind of interaction, without maybe the time to explain the why and the how of it. And they really do need that to understand. It's not a flippant thing. It's not I just want to see if you know what you're doing as a faculty member. It is really to have that understanding of what's going on behind that. The last thing that I'll kind of pull us back to as I close out my time on page 2 of the handout, there's kind of underneath the steps from Gettysburg, there's a little item there, context to navigate, that I think is also helpful for us to think about when we're considering use or the type of use in classes. The first bullet point is it's already incorporated into products like Microsoft Word and Google Docs, so if you really don't want them to use it, they have to actively ignore it. And that's not something that faculty always consider. So if you really want to be on the know, then that's going to be something that you'll have to be explicit about in policy as well, in terms of things that it might come up and generate. The second point is services like Grammarly already use AI to check tone and suggest alternative phrasing. And so if there's not a way to turn that off, and your policy is no, then you'll have to explicitly talk about that particular tool. And Grammarly is something that we would find maybe more often in writing settings. But that particular AI tool, I've heard from incoming undergraduates, oh yeah, we were taught by our English teacher in high school how to use that app to help us blank, blank, blank. So in some cases, the students that are coming out of US K-12 environments have already been taught how to use some of these tools. And if our response is no, we kind of have to walk that back a little bit. And then finally, workplaces already find job candidates with GenAI schools to be more desirable depending on the career path. So again, thinking about what is our comfort level, does it align with the learning objectives we have for our course? Are we conveying that information in syllabi statements, not just the what, but the how, in writing and through conversation? And have we thought all the way through the different things that may be involved? Some related to the tools themselves, some related to the types of learners that we have in our classes, whether they have specific challenges or not. And again, coming back to the idea that it's related back to our learning objectives. I encourage faculty not just to rush in because it's the new thing and everybody's talking about it. Everybody's still talking about calculators and we're still using those too. It's a tool. It doesn't have to be adopted by everybody. Let it align with your learning objectives and your strategies for your courses, and go forth and be fantastic. Thanks for your time.
Hi, I'm Martha Schaffer. I'm a senior instructor in the English department, and I'm the director of first year writing. And I am delighted to be here today to talk about this. One of the great boons of the GenAI phenomenon for me personally has been that I get invited all over the campus to talk to people that I've never talked to before about what do we do about students using generative AI to write papers. So, and I love to talk about students and writing. So I'm here today to talk about research writing in particular, and I encourage all of you to consider the possibility that part of our role is to help students develop generative AI literacy in their and through their writing projects. So my plan for today is that we'll talk a little bit about perspectives and the perspective I come from in writing studies on this, my experience working with students in the classroom. I taught a class called Writing in AI last spring that was very enlightening. I will also talk a little bit about activities that we did in that class that maybe could inspire activities that you would engage with, and then a little bit about best practices for using generative AI in your own classroom. And then I do have some resources to share that I think can be very helpful in thinking about your own Gen AI literacy. So So first, perspectives. So GenAI is a technology, and I know there have been times when these words came out of my mouth. Oh, it's just another technology. It's just a calculator. It's just word processing. It's, we'll all get over it and move on. And I realize now, of course, that that's flippant and that it's not that. But I also don't think it's the end of all writing. I had a colleague say to me at the end of last spring, what are we even doing anymore, right? If there's Gen AI, why are we even teaching writing? So I think there's a lot of room in the middle of those ends of the spectrum to think about it. And in terms of Gen AI, particularly in the context of learning and teaching, I think we have to think about the ways in which this technology shapes who we are, how it affects our learning and our understanding of the world, how it becomes even a lens through which we see the world, and that the goal here should be to emphasize literacy. If our goal or mission is to educate students, then we need to give them an ability to work with tools, use those tools, understand what those tools do, and what the implications of that use is. So my goal has been to encourage students and myself to understand and critique it and think about making good choices for the use of it. These two quotes that I have up on the screen right now are taken from some materials that are produced by writing studies scholars. The first is TextGen Ed. It's a great resource that offers different activities, lesson plans, things people have done and tried with Gen AI in their classrooms. And they talk about the writing process, which, as Matthew said, is always our emphasis over the writing product. And to think about, to what extent do we have a choice over how these things become or don't become part of our writing processes. And the second is a call from the Modern Language Association and the Conference on College Composition and Communication, the Task Force on Writing and AI. They've issued a variety of statements, and they're really calling for literacy development in the context of writing, so that students are gaining this AI literacy in addition to other literacies that they're in college for. So in terms of my experiences, I taught, as I said, a class writing in AI last spring. It was a university seminar, one of the last in the SAGES program. And I had students majoring in all different areas. I had students who were just super excited to talk about writing in AI. I had students who were just there to get the credits. It was a really, really productive class, and they all came from, different stages of their education, different disciplines, and had lots of really great stuff to say about writing in AI. But where we started was with attitudes, just kind of taking the temperature. Our students take great pride in their written work. Written work is very personal. It's risk-taking to put yourself in your work and put your insights and your ideas out there for other people to see and read. And many of them were super offended by the idea that somebody would pass off something from ChatGPT as their own work. At the same time, there were students who said, I was a first-year college student and I was totally overwhelmed and it seemed like a lot of busy work and I used it for everything. And at the end of the semester, I realized I hadn't learned anything, so I deleted the app and deactivated my account, and now I'm just going it alone. So there's lots of different reasons why students make use of it, why we make use of it ourselves. They're people too. And it's interesting to just have conversations around what it means to them, how they see it working or not working, what it does well for them, what it doesn't do for them. We also took a couple of approaches in the course together. The first was curiosity, just like what even is this? We read a couple books I'll share with you at the end as resources about what exactly artificial intelligence is. How does it operate? And then we read about how it contains a lot of biases, and that it is racist, and it is problematic in a variety of ways, in a variety of operations, and that it sort of embodies whatever the people making it put into it, and it's collecting data from people who haven't given consent for their data to be collected. So we turned like a critical eye to it. We also talked about the ethical implications of using it as an author, putting work out there and it not being your own, or issues around authors' work being scrubbed by it for information, as well as talking about academic integrity and what it will do to workforces and people in jobs out in the real world in the various areas that students were going into. The third approach that I took was a collaborative approach. They were using it a lot more than I was. They were doing different things with it than I was doing. So we had a lot of conversations experimenting with it and then talking about how that went, how we were using it, what it was doing for us, what it was denying us the opportunity to do for ourselves. But we were sharing and building our experience together, learning from each other. We did a few projects in the class. We used it as a tool in the writing process. Some students liked it for brainstorming and getting started. Some students liked it for summarizing a really complicated article before they read the article so that they had kind of a idea, framework for what they were about to read. Some students really loved it at the end because they were bad spellers or always had split infinitives or some other grammar thing that I wasn't really worried about, but they were. So there's lots of different places in the writing process that they could use it. And we talked along the way about, like, I used it and did this with it, and it was a disaster. I used this, and it worked really well. And like I said, we did a critical lens. We looked at it through lenses of race and gender, a variety of biases and prejudices, and looked at real-world examples about how problematic that is. And I consider this a really important part of literacy in it, to understand how something operates and how it can repeat patterns that we don't want to repeat. And then last we took it up as its own subject of study. The students wrote a survey to collect student attitudes about it. And we worked on that over a couple of classes. And then their final research projects were to look at what the implications of generative AI were for their intended careers and majors. A lot of them were juniors, a few were even seniors, and were headed out into the world into different professional arenas and careers. And they were very keen on understanding what's the effect of this technology on my intended career path. I had many students who took up art. What is AI going to do in the field of art? Several took it up in medical settings. Many more took it up in computer science. And they ultimately landed, I think generally as a group, on the fact that the most important thing, it wasn't going to be the end of everything. It wasn't going to be like, oh, who cares about this? It's going to go away. But it was going to be a combination of understanding why and how it mattered and how they could use it effectively to achieve their ends in whatever area they went. So the ethical use of AI is pretty significant and not an often discussed topic of conversation. I would encourage you to investigate this, and we talk about this with our students. There's copyright violations, there's privacy violations, there's implications in the labor market. This is true in all disciplines and areas. It's worth talking to students about understanding what's happening when they are using these tools to generate writing, and where the information is coming from and how it's getting there. It's also good to think about how this affects human beings out in the real world beyond just themselves. I think most relevant to us is that the Code of Conduct violations, the language has been updated to give an explicit statement regarding generative AI. The definition of violations now includes language that says all forms of academic dishonesty, including, and it now says, use of generative artificial intelligence without instructor permission, which is why Matthew's flowchart is all the more important to us. The burden on students is going to be difficult if we don't have clear policies and students know whether they have authorization or not. So that's new in the policy and certainly worth discussing with students and keeping in mind when you're making your own policy. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say. So making it explicit was kind of a significant move this year. In the past, the university had treated it as, it's just, it's misrepresentation or it's cheating or it's plagiarism, and now it's set out as its own thing. So I want to talk a little bit about best practices. And again, this is particularly in the case of writing instruction. I know lots of people use writing for assessment purposes. So you're not really teaching people to write, but you're asking them to write things so that they can demonstrate critical thinking or synthesis of ideas or connection making or developing their own ideas from other people's ideas. So in terms of research writing, best practices that we recommend from the writing program is first that you talk to students about generative AI, get a sense of what their attitudes are, how they're using it as they come into the class, what they think about it. This is knowledge, experience, and attitudes all is interesting to hear from them. Develop an AI use policy. I recommend and enjoy doing that with the students. So it's something we'll do in the first week of the course is talk about, that's all one conversation. How are you using, what do you think's appropriate with it? What do you think's ethical and a fair way to handle it? You want everybody to be aware, but also, have buy-in with the policy that you're using. Explore the implications in your field of study, I think is an important thing that can be done and a best practice for students. Scaffolding meaningful research projects, I highlighted because this may be, I think, the most important advice from the writing program. Scaffolding, of course, means that you see their projects in increments. You give them time to do projects over, a period that's reasonable for the size of the project. You check in with them at different points in the project. There's different iterations of the information that they're producing. It helps you get a sense of what they're doing, and it makes the project less busy work, less unmanageable, less likely to get done at the last minute. Meaningful in a research project means that students have some stake in it. It matters to them. It's relevant to them. It may be relevant professionally or in the context of the course or to some other thing that they're doing, but that it has some stakes for them personally. So they take pride in the work and they're willing to commit the time and energy to the work. The other thing is to emphasize the human element of research and writing. I know in years past when we've talked about, one of the things we're very focused on in the writing program is helping them figure out how to use sources. In the first year, like what do you do with a source? How do you write about a source? How do you represent their ideas fairly while setting up your own argument? So kind of nuances of integrating sources. And we talk a lot about the source or the article or the book, but these are people that are producing writing in the world that they care very much about. And our students should get that deference from us too. There are people in the world producing writing that they care about. We also recommend that you let students have opportunities to experiment with Gen AI. I know faculty who have said, let's put the prompt through and see what it does. And then the students tear the output apart as bad writing. I know that people have said, let's do this activity with it and share what we found about it at a particular point in the writing process or multiple points in the writing process. But just a sense that there is some curiosity and experimentation available to them, as within the context of your learning environment. And I'll endorse Matthew's statement to avoid Gen AI detectors. They are behind Gen AI all the time. They do pick up a variety of things that are not plagiarism or misrepresentation or cheating. And quite frankly, in the conversations I've had around people who are using them, it's sort of setting up a kind of arms race with the students about who can outguess whom about whether or not something has been generated by AI rather than human intelligence. So with that, I'll turn to some resources. We read these books in my class in the spring. They're all very accessible. The first, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You, is a great title. It's probably a 60-minute read, but it really, if you're not up on computers and algorithms and that kind of stuff, it's a really great piece to read quickly and get a sense like, oh, I get what this is doing now, and this isn't so intelligent after all. Race After Technology was our common read at the university a few years ago, Ruha Benjamin. This is another great piece that looks at how what the intersection of race and technology is, which is a really, really fascinating area overall, but this kind of focuses in on this advent of artificial intelligence. And then finally, Meredith Broussard's More Than a Glitch, Confronting Bias, Gender, and Ability Bias in Tech. She goes chapter by chapter through a variety of biases that are contained within generative AI and kind of puts the focus on who's producing the software, who's writing the code, who's generating the algorithms, where is the large language model, what's in there, what is this scrubbing and using and producing for us, and to be knowledgeable and up to date about that. And that was very eye-opening for the students. We spent a lot of time talking about that. They were surprised and offended, rightly so. And then here are some resources just in terms of teaching writing. I've linked our academic integrity policy. The writing program has a great webpage on AI and academic writing. Again, this is thinking about first, why you're using writing. Is this a writing for an assessment tool, and is that the appropriate way to do the assessment? And then there's writing because we're teaching you to write, or we believe writing is a process of thinking or composing or creating new knowledge. Text Gen Ed, I mentioned at the beginning. This is an open educational resource, an edited collection of lessons and activities that other writing instructors have used in a variety of disciplines. It's really very interesting. And they just did an update to it that's linked there too. The Modern Language Association and the 4Cs, the college writing people. The task force just put out this year a student guide to AI literacy that gives you it's sort of a checklist that says you have AI literacy if you are capable of doing and understanding and knowing these things, which is a great resource to talk about with students. And then finally, we have humans that consult on writing on campus. Wonderful Humans at the Writing Resource Center. It's located over in Bellflower, but we have some satellite locations. We also can do this online. But there's nothing like talking to somebody about their writing. So I encourage you and your students to take advantage of that service. And I'll just close with this quote from the student guide to AI literacy. I think that AI literacy is an opportunity, and seeing the growth and prevalence of generative AI is an opportunity for us to learn more, to interact with our students and learn from them, to find new ways to develop skills. And ultimately, if we aren't learning about how to use these tools and equipping our students to use these tools, then the likelihood of these things taking over our human tasks increases. I heard somebody say, if the product is free, you are the product. So let's not let our students be the product, and let's not us be the product, but let's figure out how we can use these things for good or for ill, and equip our students with those skills as they move through their educations and on into other learning environments.
I'm Razan Badran. I'm a teaching and learning designer at Teaching and Learning Technologies. And with me here is my colleague Indra.
Hi, my name is Indra Wasvirjan. I'm also an instructional designer here at Teaching and Learning Technologies. Happy to be here.
So today in this presentation, we are going to first introduce two GenAI chatbots, Copilot and Cruise AI Portal. We are going to demonstrate how you can be using GenAI in your work. And while doing so, we will be sharing some tips and key strategies into effective prompting. And finally, we are going to share resources on how you can explore these tools on your own.
All right, so I want to introduce you with two, generative AI chatbots here. First is one you've probably already heard about, Microsoft Copilot, right? This is our sort of our way into generative AI. We have an enterprise license here, so it's kind of a special case of Copilot. So as long as you're logging in with your own case ID, you're getting to the enterprise version of Copilot. The other tool here is CRU AI, which is actually an internally developed generative AI chatbot that's being developed at UTech with a third party. And we'll talk a little bit more about these two tools in just a second. And actually, sorry, one other thing I want to bring up is that actually learned today too, we have a third tool, which is Google Gemini, which is just released today, that maybe will be rolling out to your inboxes shortly. So just know there's actually three tools, but I'm going to talk about two today in this presentation. All right, so why are these tools great? One is free. Well, for us, we don't pay a cent. Case does, but that's great. Number two, it's available to everyone at Case, so faculty, students, and staff, right? All three groups can use it. The output quality is similar and comparable to competitors, so things like ChatGPT, Anthropic, Claude, these tools that we're showing today are just as good, so you're not missing out on any quality per se. And most importantly is that your data is not used to train these models, right? So in some ways it's safe for case use. So if you have any kind of information that's sort of sensitive, you can use these chatbots with that kind of data. I put a little asterisk there, and to kind of bring your attention down to the bottom left, the UTech AI tool page. It has a list of those tools plus other AI tools, and also a little more detail about the data privacy for each of these tools. So if you think about HIPAA and FERPA, those may not fall in those. So if you're doing data that is HIPAA, FERPA, maybe you can't use those. So again, you want to check that website to make sure you understand what the boundaries are for the data protections. All right. So even though we've mentioned these three tools, I'm going to focus on CRU AI, which is the internally developed chatbot. One thing we like about it, and that's why we're sharing it, is that it saves your history of chats. It seems like a small thing, but being able to go back and see what you've done and how it responded is very helpful. The other thing, too, is that there's an area where you can save prompts. So if you find something you like, there's a little space where you can add the prompt and you can go back to it and use it over and over again. One thing to note is that it can't generate images. So if one of your things is you want to try doing GenAI images, use Microsoft Copilot. All right, so let's go on to our demo.
So now, to move from theory into practice, we are going to demonstrate how Gabrielle, a chemistry faculty member, uses AI in her teaching. So a very important practice is for an instructor to always communicate with their students and ensure that they are actually progressing effectively in their learning. So for that purpose, Gabrielle actually did a mid-semester survey where she asked her students about what they have been finding helpful, if they are facing any challenges or difficulties, and if they have any input to give on the teaching material or the teaching strategies. Now, luckily, 30 of her students actually responded. Or unluckily, in case now you think that she has to go through them, try to identify any trends or themes in between. So for that purpose, she decides to actually resort to CRU's AI portal to analyze this data. Now, before we rush into the portal and start prompting it to do the analysis, we're gonna use a technique that Daniela and Shada highlighted on, which is, let's take a moment to think, what is the kind of output that I want from the AI? So I give that question to you. If you were in Gabrielle's shoes, what kind of insights do you want the AI to focus on its output? What do you think? What kind of information would you want to know from the student feedback?
Just significant themes that might be shared or repeated a lot in the different surveys.
Okay, the themes. Would you like any categorization? Any way that you wanted to divide these themes? So we're gonna let you know what we did and how we thought about it. We thought about how we wanted to categorize it, what kind of information we want to make it easy for us to actually analyze this data and actually benefit from how it was saving us time.
Right, so just like Razan just mentioned, one of the main things we're thinking about, is we want to make sure to see what kind of themes come up, maybe even categorize them based on frequency. So using that same activity we just did, we kind of thought about, okay, what do we want to put into this prompt? So this is the prompt that we developed. It looks pretty long, but we didn't develop this in one go. It was several iterations. So let me just read it just real quickly, just so you have a general idea of what it's about. So it says, I'm a university faculty member looking to improve my course based on mid-semester student feedback. Please analyze the uploaded student feedback. And we have a set of kind of detailed instructions. So we're saying categorize reviews, divide the feedback into positive and reviews. And these are kind of similar things that were kind of mentioned here by the audience as well. And then we end it with thank you for your assistance, right? So I'm going to go ahead and focus on a couple elements of this prompt to kind of show you what are key parts of a prompt that you always want to include. So for example, role, this is something that Daniela and Shaza also brought up. You want to let the AI know what your role is so that it kind of has some context, so it understands how it should talk to you, what kind of locus of information to kind of direct its search on. And so in this case, we said, I am a university faculty member. The other is context, right? So you want to ensure the AI understands the desired outcomes, and so it can guide it to provide relevant insights. So in this case, we've said, improve my course based on mid-semester student feedback. And then, of course, that's pretty straightforward, is task. So giving it a task that is most clear and direct will give you the most accurate responses, which makes sense. So the specificity of that task and the language you use makes a big difference on how that response, how the output is created. And so in this case, it was analyze the uploaded student feedback. And then last but not least is instructions. So giving precise step-by-step instructions helps the AI understand how to break down the task. And again, this is very, very specific. This is something that after we ran it the first time, it was kind of being more vague. And we're like, well, we kind of want it to identify major themes, like an A, as you can see. I'm going to focus on B right here, which we said in both positive and negative reviews is to provide relevant student comments for each theme. And we did that because when we're doing prompts, you kind of want to make sure that the chatbot is giving you a correct output. And so by putting that in there, we're able to look back and say, okay, you said this is the theme. Here are the student responses related to that theme. And so we can also verify that it didn't just make up feedback and say that this is the correct theme, right? So when you're writing prompts, think about ways in which you can put in, I guess, information so that you can always go back and check to see that the output is correct. All right, so now we have the prompt, and so now we're actually going to go into the CWRU AI portal. So like I've mentioned on the left, there is the kind of history of chats, so you can go back and click on any of these and see what you've prompted or how it's responded. In the center is where you do the prompting itself, where you chat with it. I'm just going to set these guidelines real quick. But on the bottom left, you'll see there's this paperclip. If you click on that, that's where you can upload files, whether that's a reading, a syllabi, whatever document you might want for it to interact with. Next is this microphone. You can actually turn it on. Well, if you have it turned on, it will actually, you can dictate to the chatbot itself. In the center area is where you should type the chat itself. On the right is where you send the chat up. And then the last icon, which is like a deck of cards, is where you can save prompts. All right, so back to the prompt. We wanted to get this mid-semester feedback, so we're going to use CWRU AI to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to upload our feedback from our students. So let me go ahead and navigate there. So it's on the desktop, and open that guy up. And I'm going to just make this just a smidge smaller because there is something right here at the very bottom of this page that I cannot see it. That says upload or chat with. Yeah. Here we go. 1 second. There we go. All right. Let me try that one more time. So you pick the student feedback, upload the file, and then we want to click chat with file. Let it upload. You see now it's in its memory. We can either copy or paste the prompt itself. I'm going to go into my memory since I already did this beforehand. So I'm going to click on that prompt. It's the same one that we just shared. I'm going to hit return and then go ahead and let it generate. So as you can see, it's starting to give us our themes, both the positive and the negative reviews. Depending on the time of day, sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's slower. And we're getting to the negative reviews. It's giving the frequencies as well as the feedback from the students themselves. All right. And so we've kind of saved us hopefully a little bit of time, maybe just to kind of get started. We just want to get going real quick. So if we look at some of the negative themes that maybe we want to start to implement in our course mid-semester, let's say outdated, irrelevant content, lack of engagement. So maybe a place to start is maybe we'll look at assignments and maybe improve engagement and inclusivity in our assignments. All right.
So now that we have identified what are the issues that we want to work on, Gabrielle decided to start on saying how she can actually turn a foundational basic chemistry problem into something that is engaging and inclusive. While this is not the easiest task, so she also decides to seek the CWRU AI portal in order to brainstorm some ideas. So she chooses one of her assignments, which is a basic chemistry. A basic chemistry assignment. The students have a gas sample with initial conditions of temperature, pressure, and volume. This gas is compressed. They have to find the new pressure. So in terms of the learning objective, it is simply trying to identify the known and unknown variables and figure out what kind of equation they need to solve. So if we want to prompt AI to make this more engaging, there are several ways that we can do it, but if you want to think within the same logic that you were talking about, first we have to identify the context. So we can just simply say, I have a traditional assignment that is focused on applying concepts that I want to make more engaging and relevant, but relevant to who? To university students. And here, of course, you can even add more details about if you have more analysis about who your learners are. And then I want to give it the task. The task is brainstorm ideas into how I can turn this assignment into something that is probably scenario-based or a creative problem. So here it's very important. Now, it can go crazy with the kind of ideas that it's giving us. So we have to make sure that the new assignment still aligns with the learning objectives of the old one, and still makes sense to what my course is. So I can add also a statement that would say, while making sure that it's still aligning with the learning objective of this assignment, and probably just finish it with reiterating that I want it to be relevant to real life experiences of my students. So by this, we would have created a prompt that included the context, included the task, and the specific instructions that we are looking for. So with all of that in mind, it would really be helpful to come up with some quick and general ideas that would be helpful to us. So let's see what it's going to actually come up with. And of course, we need not to forget to share the assignment. So we can see here that it started to create multiple scenarios on how to turn such a simple assignment into something that is more fun, interactive, or at least students can relate to. So as you saw above, we have something related to a balloon dilemma, I guess. Yes, so a party balloon dilemma. The balloons were probably of a certain pressure and conditions. They changed. How do I solve this? So this is probably something that is more relevant to students' everyday life. Down below, I saw some examples relevant probably more to their professional life. So if they were doing a laboratory experiment, or below I saw something related to a space mission. So if they are part of a space mission, they had this, how would they do it? So by these exercises, the student can actually now see how these theories that they are learning in the classroom can actually be applied into their everyday life. And by that would help them be more engaged in the learning because now they see the value of it. So by just simple prompts, we're able to turn something that's very basic, very foundational, into something that is more relevant to our students. Now, a very important note here is to always validate that this actually makes sense. So to actually solve the problem before sharing it with students, to make sure that it is actually solvable and not just random numbers that our portal gathers together. After that, now we have our assignment. We've decided on the changes that we want to do. The next step is to share with our students that their feedback has been heard and that we're actually taking action based on that. Again, very important to maintain open communication with the students. So Gabrielle also uses AI to generate the email, but here it's a bit tricky because with students, you want to stay authentic, you want to stay genuine in your communication, but at the same time, we write tens of emails per day, so it's good to have a tool that helps us with the efficiency. So for that, it would be a good idea to include details because I could have simply now said, generate an email to inform my students about this point. But it would be even more helpful to give more details into what is the content that I want to include. So by that, I would have added my personal touch to the email. So I can say, for example, generate an email where I can thank my students for responding to the survey. I want them to know that I have heard their feedback and I am implementing changes based on it. I am making my assignments more engaging and inclusive. And probably I would want to tell them if they would like to reach out to me during the semester, they can always send me an email. So by that, I would have been more in control of what is in there in the email. And after we have the AI portal actually generate the email, we can always review it, probably change some of the tone or the wording that it's using to make sure that it resonates with our own communication style. So with that, we would have been able to kind of strike the balance between efficiency and personalization. So let us see what kind of output or email we will be able to generate with this AI portal. So it is first thanking the students. That is a long email. So if you can go back to the beginning of it. Okay, so first we're thanking the students, we're letting them know that their insights were valuable, and then it's informing them about what it has done. Probably you might not want to go in that much detail, so you can just ask it to be more concise. So again, this is an iterative process where you can always add more details to it. And then finally, if you can go towards the end, so it is telling the students that if you have any further suggestions, to actually reach out. So it would have probably been a good first draft just to use, build on, add your own language and personal touch, and share with your students. So over here, we were able to see how we used AI to analyze data, to brainstorm ideas, and to generate an email in probably less than 20 minutes. Something that would have probably taken you multiple hours to be able to complete. And these are just few examples of how we can use AI in our workflow. So imagine if we're able to harness the power of AI even further, while of course, as the earlier presenter mentioned, it makes sense for our course or it makes sense for our workflow, we would definitely be able to save time, increase student engagement, and improve the learner experience overall.
All right. Thank you. So just for all of you out there, you have handouts with a QR. There's also the QR there. I do want to just kind of go into this little link real quick. So it goes to our handout that we have today, as well as for all of you virtually. And it's kind of a expanded version of the handout. And let me actually try that one more time. Sorry here. Oh, interesting. Yeah. But if you go there and click there, you'll see that there's actually more information where you can learn how to prompt more specifically, as well as a whole slew of resources. One thing that's in there, and I highly recommend if you click on there, both Razan and I developed an online course for getting started in generative AI in education. That was in collaboration with UCITE, as well as KSL and a bunch of faculty on campus. If you go to there, there's a place you click on that. It'll take you to the Canvas course where you can also enroll. And moreover, there's other resources that are to the UCITE's AI resources, as well as the Writing Center, and then KSL's research guide as well. So do not sleep on that link. Please click on it and definitely enroll and share it with other people that you know. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily, or M. Dragowski, and I'm colleagues of Razan and Indra in University Technologies. I'm part of the Research, Computing, and Cyber Infrastructure team. Figuratively, we work in the basement, okay? And so if I can indulge for a moment in a food service analogy, we are definitely back of house, okay? We don't really interact with faculty in a direct way, except to provide them with some computing resources. I'm overstating just a little bit, but it was a really fantastic opportunity to represent what research computing can provide in this context of generative AI, because we don't really see the end result very often. We're kind of at the beginning establishing what resources are necessary and then providing them. And so today has been a real eye-opener for me. And the slides are prepared. You know, that was then me. And now me is like, why did I put these slides together? Okay. But there is a brief and I think interesting story to share, and these slides, if I can, yes. Why now, right? Why was it 2022, 2023? Why now for the breakout of generative AI, and particularly these large language models? It turns out that there's a much broader technology that underlies the large language models, so give a little thought to that. I want to build out just a little bit the idea of what research computing has to offer in terms of support. And I'll close with just kind of a motivating thought experiment. That's what I tried to capture with that last bullet. I once studied literature, but, it was a while ago. All right. Now, here's my first takeaway, and I didn't want it to get lost in the detail of the next few slides. All right, so why? Why now for generative AI? It's the fact that we now have together capable compute. I'm using my research technology lingo, compute, together with internet scale data to leverage algorithms that have evolved over decades. People have been working for a very long time, making incremental progress, in large part because of the lack of items 1 and 2. And the end result is we are achieving, in select applications, high predictive power, right? Large language models are showing high predictive power when given thoughtfully constructed prompts. And that's not the only discipline. Okay. Now, I had to challenge myself to go back and kind of review foundations. The inspiration for these algorithms was really advances in beginning to understand how the brain makes sense of visual input information. And as we learned more about the anatomy and physiology of the retina, the optical nerve pathway, the parts of the brain that take advantage of that information, that was translated by people into techniques for modeling that process. The mathematics was very advanced. I mean, mathematics has been doing matrix and tensor manipulations for centuries, right? Those methods are well established. They were adapted to this kind of model, and kind of the trick that they use and what's embedded in the algorithms is an image is assessed at a smaller scale, and it's kind of rastered over to look for features within the image. And so that's what classification is based on. It's just understanding features that compose the image. Now, we now call, and we have for quite a while, since probably the 80s, this ensemble of algorithms as artificial neural networks. Again, looking back to this motivation of capturing what's going on in the brain. And the one other high-level point is that going back to the role mathematics plays, is that these neural networks allow to generalize mathematical functions. And so the next slide, okay. So the next slide, artificial neural networks are structured so that there are what does network refer to? It's nodes with connections in between all the nodes of one layer and the next layer. Now, any layer in the middle, which I'm referring to this hidden, it's a hidden layer, it can be very deep. They have backward connections and forward connections, but no node looks any farther away than the most adjacent layer. Okay, this is not the brain, right? We know this is not the brain. The brain is layered and interconnected way more intricately than these models, and yet they achieve really interesting results. The hidden layer is worth pointing out, and I've got an illustration on the next slide. The hidden layer is called that because it is in fact inaccessible. We cannot know what is going on inside the inner layer, or the hidden layer. It has then been termed a black box because literally you don't really know the equation being used. You just have no access. So keep the black box nature of artificial neural networks in mind when you're thinking about all of these tools, and be prepared to ask, are we developing techniques that allow us to actually understand what's going on? There are efforts to do that, but they're really early days even now. Okay. So I mentioned the fact that a neural network can implement kind of arbitrary mathematical functions. Earlier speakers have talked about the fact that large language, large language models, when they are trained, they are described with upwards of billions of parameters. So a standard kind of a quadratic equation in mathematics has like 3 parameters, right? So billions of parameters. We don't really have the sense making for what that neural network is doing. And so together with the black box issue, there's the question of what is the scope of applicability for the model itself with respect to the data that it's trained on. So where it can train against data, it will end up being very well constrained. That's the flexibility of a high parameter general mathematical function. Where it's not trained, we don't know, right? So think hallucinations of LLMs. Okay, so that I think summarizes what I wanted to say about the algorithmic foundations. I can really briefly go through kind of what has taken place on the compute side. Moore's law was a phrase that was very popular as I first went to college and as I was working. It's a statement that really had application for kind of the 1960s through the very early 2000s. The speed of a computer increased as the number of transistors on a chip increased. Okay. Now, when features on chips began to get down to 20 or 30 nanometers in scale, kind of outrageous, but yes, that's what the photolithography technology can achieve. Who was that? Who was that thermodynamics person? Anyway, some physicists imagined demons, little demons who managed the heat flow in the thermal systems. Well, the demons ran amok when you got the scale of the features so small. And in fact, the thermal density on modern compute chips, if you think about it in thermal units per like square millimeter, actually rival that in the interior of a nuclear reactor. It's just crazy stuff. So managing the heat became a limitation. And this meant that CPUs then developed kind of substructures for doing compute. The substructures did not compute any faster, but the technology allowed to create more substructures in a small compact package. And what this leads to is what I decided to refer to as the hierarchy of compute efficiencies. Okay, so your most efficient computations are done with central processing units when you have multiple cores within a single computer. Now you can scale out beyond that, but your efficiency suffers because you're then having to pass data between, I'm sorry, I jumped a step. That was cores within an individual CPU. Most computers have 2 CPUs with multiple cores in each. You lose efficiency when you have to communicate between those CPUs within one computer. If you have to scale out across multiple computers, then you lose more efficiency. So this was happening in the early 2000s. These limitations were being confronted. Ways around them were found. And some people started to realize, wait a minute, there's another compute element within essentially every computer. Maybe not every data center computer, but if you needed graphical output, there was this little thing called a GPU. And it was very, very good at doing very simple computations very fast to determine what color to assign to all the pixels on a display screen. And it turns out GPUs have way more cores for computing than central processing units. And so in context of that compute hierarchy, you don't have to leave the same, you don't have to leave a single computer to scale up your compute to thousands of compute cores. Now, they're not as capable as the individual cores of a central processing unit, but it turns out artificial neural networks don't need complexity. They're doing lots and lots of simple computation. And that's why GPUs have been adopted. Now, it wasn't recognized immediately, so we have gamers, we have Jared Bendis, for goodness sakes, to thank in part for the evolution of GPU devices to be as capable as they became around the time of the AlexNet that was described in the morning session. That was the first neural network that was able to achieve really high precision on image categorizations. Okay, so the modern central or graphical processing unit really can't live next to a central processing unit anymore. The large rectangles at the bottom of this image house GPU cards. They've grown very large. They consume a lot of energy, 10 or 20 or 30 times the amount of energy that we were told earlier in the day that our brains make use of, 20 watts or so inside the cranium, 300 or more watts for a single GPU device. And now we're packing 4 or 8 into a single computer server. And the costs scale. One of these servers with 4 contemporary GPU cards, more than $40,000. And I haven't even quoted that in the last year since NVIDIA started becoming an amazingly wealthy company, not just a fabulously wealthy company. Okay, so with all this compute, the algorithms then kind of matured a bit, and supervised learning and unsupervised learning and even reinforcement learning, like what they implement in driverless cars, these things all really had the compute resource that they'd been lacking. And then finally, data started catching up, not just the corpus of web-related data, but genomics, right? The Human Genome Project, which I think right around the turn of the last century, they genomed a full human sequence, or maybe the other way around, sequenced a full human genome. And now it happens like thousands or millions of times a day, everywhere. We live in a data-rich society. And so the applications of the artificial neural networks are really vast. Some of the applications that researchers are involved in who are using some of the research computing resources, like with the AlexNet, there have been advances in image classification, bioinformatics with the genomics data. Some of our other friends in the biomedical engineering department, we've seen in recent years the kinds of achievements they're making in terms of brain-machine interface, a phrase which just shakes me to my toes. But you know what? Some people have challenges and really, really benefit from that technology. So it's up to us to use it wisely. Medical diagnosis, I'll give a bit of attention to. Protein structure determination is the most interesting to me relative to large language models, because as I understand it, large language models are not given a grammar in advance. They just go and learn it. So protein structure determination is very similar. And so I think it's really interesting that even with the constraint of the black box, we're beginning to learn a lot, as well as just benefiting from outcomes. Outcomes from generative AI are starting to inform our understanding of different systems. The Center for Computational Imaging and Personalized Diagnostics, again, back to biomedical engineering, they came to research computing very early in our, we've been around 15 or so years, and they've been with us from very close to the beginning. So their work has leveraged image analysis and categorization in the context of performing diagnostics with pathology data, but also with non-invasive radiology data. And so it's a really satisfying outcome to have been associated with in research computing. So what our group does to support people is we do have some local resource, but like compared with what a large language model needs, I have to talk with folks and learn what does Copilot use, because it must dwarf our little system. We have on the order of 100 GPU devices. They're in the basement here in the data center. About 4,000 CPU cores. You know, it's useful stuff, but it's not Google, it's not Amazon. The benefit is that people can just hack around on it. You know, we've bought it, we make it available. People can do their research, but students can also learn. They can get in on the back end. How do you do this stuff? And of course, we support more broadly than artificial neural networks. But with the advent of the data science programs on campus, we are seeing a lot of uptake of the research computing resources in those areas. One very interesting facility that we manage, but it was purchased by an individual faculty member, Professor Vipin Shadari, in Computer Science and Data Science Department. It's really just 4 computers. They each have 8 nearly state-of-the-art GPU devices in them. And so this is used for a combination of research and teaching applications. And it's something that we were able to incorporate into the HPC computing environment without too much difficulty. And it's actually been a pleasure to have these devices that are unique to us in their capabilities. In terms of student learning, we opened up the cluster intentionally to use for coursework, and the little graph there shows, you know, the kind of the level of interest in terms of classes per academic year. Aside from the hardware, we help just with the very basics of how do you get going in this resource. We do share some tutorial material, which I think it was mentioned also earlier. Tutorials are almost instantly out of date, so you know we're always embarrassed by our documentation, but it opens a conversation, right? And so that's very nice. Okay. Final thought. So these graphical processing units, they are really much more capable than the initial devices, but they are still an evolutionary advance. They're evolutionary. They're not a revolutionary architecture. They don't really help implement a model that might be closer to the network of structures between neurons in the human brain. So amongst the national scale resources that we can help people access, there is a technology that a company is sharing through the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, where they're not relying for their compute on chips stamped out of wafers, but they're making circuits across entire wafers. And I don't know nearly as much about it as I'd like to, but what I want to do is just emphasize the point again that the GPU architecture, there's really nothing magic about it. It was kind of a happy coincidence that it could be used to support the artificial neural networks. But over the next, somebody else's future, probably not my future, we can look forward, I think, with some reliability to new architectures coming forward that enhance our ability to do good with computing. And so for myself and the research computing team, thanks for the opportunity to present at this event.
Great, thank you all very much. So we have a time for some questions as well before we take a break. So I would encourage you all to think about our presentations today, if there's any questions anyone has. And to start, I would actually like to ask Emma a question. So one of the things you mentioned early on was this idea of a black box. And one of the core tenets for us is reproducible research. And so that creates some dissonance there. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how that, what's the impact of that black box on the ability to do reproducible research?
That's such a fantastic question. So I come out of the physics community, and so we acknowledge that any result has uncertainty to it. In physics, you work very hard to minimize two things, or we break uncertainty into two parts. One is statistical uncertainty, the measurements you've made, and you make assessments with how well those measurements fit your model. But there's also what we call systematic uncertainty. So when you make experiments, if you're using physical devices, then you have to understand how your device works. How well does your device work? So there's these two components. There's kind of a slowly, quietly raging discussion going on about how to cope with uncertainty in the context of these neural networks, because they don't provide access to what's going on. So the way that people are talking about, one way is to implement what's called physics-assisted AI. The previously mentioned Professor Chaudhary, Professor Starkman in physics, I believe that they are fomenting discussion on campus. Certainly groups around the nation, in campuses, across campuses, in disciplines, they're really trying to understand, how do we do better here? Because the end goal is that you don't just want something that does cool stuff. You want the thing that does cool stuff to teach you about the method that's being used to do the cool stuff, So you really, and cool stuff in this sense is like human knowledge. So that's like really cool stuff. But if we abdicate the understanding of how something is done to some algorithm that we can't, you can't even coax it, right? You can't invite it out and hey, let's go get a coffee and tell me more about how you do what you do. Just not there, right? So, yeah.
And John, did you want to speak at all? Actually, Jen's right behind you.
I have a quick question. Just for all of you, curious about, well, we talked a lot today about all of the tools that we have available here at CASE. I think Tron's going to talk about more of that in a second, but also tools that are available online. And just wondering if each of you could maybe say something about how you would imagine helping people determine which tool is the right tool for the thing that they're trying to get done. So, Martha, you talked about writing, and Matthew, you talked about using it in the classroom. And so we have ways that we're thinking about this in libraries, but I'm just curious what you're all doing.
I think it's conversational, just like we've talked about earlier in terms of determining when it's appropriate for use. It's conversational with faculty, like some of the ones that Em has already mentioned, and the one that Razan mentioned from chemistry. What are you doing? What are you using? And in some cases, we heard last semester from faculty, for example, in the Weatherhead School, that they were working with students to do the behind-the-scenes kind of coding work. And so they were learning from their students what was possible. The faculty had the idea or the thought, but the students were helping with that. So it's, from my perspective, it's having conversations with students who may be more advanced technology-wise than I am, but I have the expert knowledge in terms of my content area, my discipline, and the thought processes to organize that knowledge into ways that can be disseminated to students so that they can actively engage with it. The exciting thing is that we're learning with students. And it's, again, this idea that we don't have to be the experts in the area. It is okay to learn with and from our students. That reciprocation, I think, is really highlighted by these tools.
Yeah, I mean, in writing, ChatGPT is, the free version of it is what we experimented with in my class last spring. But I've moved everybody toward Copilot, since that's all, that's sort of protected and sort of a safe space for students to be experimenting with it without giving up their information or, somebody having access to things. So I do like that has that educational vibe to it, and that's what I'm going to use with students from now on. But I don't use Grammarly. I signed up for it the other day, and now it's been pushing me emails, but I know students love Grammarly. It's been a long-standing thing that they've used even before AI, and now it's all AI hyped up. So I know that students use that a great deal in our writing classes.
Yeah. And just one thing to also add is that these tools are constantly evolving and changing, and their models are changing. So one tool might be good at one thing today, but then tomorrow another tool might be better at something else. So since we are still in this exploration phase, I guess it's important to try and use these different tools, see which one is better for writing, which one is better for image generation, and so on, so that we're trying to get the best out of what's available now and not just stick to one tool, use it for everything, and that's it.
And to also add to that as well, is just to say that, a lot of my work, sometimes I'm playing with different chat bots, and I'm trying to figure out, well, which one actually is better for this and which is better for that. In the last few months, it's already changed. And so yesterday I would have said, oh, ChatGPT seems to be the best. I like that. And then the other day I might say Copilot, next day I might say Anthropic Claude. At this point, I think maybe Tron might agree with me. I even asked him, I was like, well, what do you think about Gemini? And he's like, well, right now it kind of feels like it's preference. So it's almost like, like any tool you've learned to use the thing the best. Like, so if you used Word a lot, that's what I'm going to use. For me, I started with ChatGPT, so I'm most comfortable with it. So I've kind of gravitated towards CRU AI because it looks like ChatGPT. So again, like to talk what Razan just mentioned, is like exploring these tools for yourself to see what resonates with you and what can help you do the things that you need to do. Right. Yeah.
So, having acknowledged out loud that my documentation really is poor, and having learned that the chatbots actually, handle lots of languages, and it turns out at least some of them handle programming languages. And so the notion of formulating a useful prompt to say, please provide me with a template for a bash script that will implement a for loop to perform an evaluation of a collection of text files has become a more relevant kind of use case for me than before I walked into the room this morning.
So as we're talking about tools, I want to have pause on questions for 1 second. I just want to have Tron speak a little bit because some tools have become available, and so I just want to give him a moment.
Thanks. So I'm Tron Compton-Engel, Senior Director of Client Experience in UTech, and I just wanted to really mostly make people aware of this webpage. So this is case.edu/utech/AI. This is where we list the services, AI-related services provided by UTech. We also have a news section you can see here on the right that just talks about things that are being released that have maybe AI in them. Maybe there's not a complete AI service, but it has AI components that might be useful to the campus community. And we're doing a very good job of keeping this webpage up to date. It's a great place to go and see the latest from UTech on AI. And I just want to highlight a couple of things that are available at this point. So, of course, we've already talked about Copilot, basic chatbot that uses ChatGPT 4 for its language model. That's available to the campus community. The big announcement is, as of today, Google Gemini is available to the campus community. Google has finally added data protections to their service, like Microsoft, where it's not being used to train models. Humans don't have access to the data. So that happened on August 30th. And so therefore, we're now able to offer Gemini to the campus community. This is another basic Gen AI chatbot that you can use and ask it questions. One thing to note is we have 3 services that can produce images. So we had discussions today about image generation. Copilot can generate images, text to image. Gemini can generate images, text to image. And we also have Adobe express.adobe.com, that will generate images from text. So we have 3 places you can go to generate images. You can try them all out and see which one generates the best image for you. But that is available. They certainly have their pros and cons. You'll see as you mess around with them. We have Zoom AI Companion, which is Zoom's AI service built right into it. You can turn it on for your account. If you go into your Zoom settings, you can turn Zoom AI Companion on. It'll do things like create transcripts of meetings, tell you what your action items are from your meetings, summarize your meetings. So that is available. I just mentioned Adobe Express. We've seen a demo of CRU AI. That is available. The idea of this is sort of a AI intranet for the campus. This will grow in capability over time. Right now, this is version 1.0 that we saw today, but it'll have many more capabilities over the next year. Watch this webpage as we announce those capabilities over time. We will make little news articles as this grows in capability. I think you'll be surprised to see what it can do in a year. The other thing I wanted to highlight is, we had the question about how do you find out more? How do you know what to use? We do have an AI consultation service with UTech, so you can request a consultation and we'll talk with you about what's available and maybe what might work best for you on your project. So that is something that we have available. Just to highlight again on some of these articles, a fun one that just got released by Microsoft. You'll see here on August 29th, they made a new app called Clipchamp available. It is a basic video editor, but one of the fun things it does is it will do text to speech. So you don't have to be your own narrator. Maybe you hate your voice, right? Like I do, I hate my voice. And so you can just type in what you want it to say and you can choose a bunch of different voices and it'll do the narration for you. You don't have to narrate your own classroom videos anymore. You could choose whatever voice you want and have it narrate your video for you without having to listen to yourself. So just a sample of the kind of thing that's been released in just the last couple of weeks. So keep an eye on this page.